Good morning. Today is the 6th of January. Happy New Year. We are out in the northeastern vigilance area and we are here pre-snowstorm. When we come back next week, you might have as much as a foot of snow on the ground. That's what they were predicting, so we'll see what happens. True to New England tradition, though, the weatherman has predicted anywhere from 3 inches to 3 feet because they obviously don't know. But with the change of the month and the change of the year comes, winter is here now. And we are trying to repeat the conditions where that weird pulsating sound was last year, among other things. And if it does reappear, we're going to try to determine what the bleep it is, if we don't have any other immediate goals. I expect it to be quieter from now until probably April, if only because hunting season's now over. So the people that were out here doing the hunting and all that, they are now not, because the season's done, unless they're poaching coyotes or something. That's between them and the game warden. But got a couple of things to cover today, and we'll take things from there. Let's get going. Let's hit it and see what we do and beat the snow back. So we'll see what we find. Thanks. Back. So I find myself today thinking in kind of a geological kind of point of view, if only because the forestry class I'm taking is currently getting into the study of rangelands. And in the first unit that we did, I have picked up knowledge on soil and dirt to a level I would have not thought that you would pick up in a class like this, but that's my mistake. So I'm looking around in this deciduous forest that we're in and using words like deciduous forest, because that's the zone of the country we're in as opposed to the Florida zone. And Florida, true to the weird nature of your wacky state down there, you guys got your own climate down there. Kind of like you're like America's little extension of the Caribbean. And then you get into the South, like the Midwestern and the Pacific and all these others. And each one has its own little biome, to use a scientifically sciencey sounding word. And so over there, just on a note on that level, the little boulder field there from last year when I was dealing with the pulsing sound, whatever the hell it was. It was infrasonic, which is fascinating. I haven't heard it yet this year. It may have been a one-off and I may never hear it again, but I'm just allowing for the fact maybe if you were to reintroduce the weirdness of it, it would be interesting to me that it's like something, it's like a wintertime phenomenon. So you add that to the mix when you do your research as to what the hell it is, because it is that weird. I'll say it again, I've been doing this since 2003. I have not encountered that before or since anywhere that I've been. And I've done research in every state from Jersey all the way through to Jersey, Connecticut, New York, Mass, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I've done research and I've hit that nowhere ever, except for that one time right here coming from that direction out there. And if you follow the scientific model that I Googled when I got back from that, it was something that was probably somewhere between a kilometer out or somewhere between 900 meters and a kilometer out based on the readings I got at the time, which is interesting. It was definitely a sonic kind of a phenomenon. What it is, I don't know. But it is testimony to, I'm not going to be completely rude to the woo people, because when you hear me describe it, it kind of plays into that category. And the thing I did differently than one of them, I didn't just do a recording, I actually took measurements of it. And I make the argument it's no longer the woo when you can get readings and data and you can actually measure what the phenomenon's doing and you get consistent readings. And this did produce something like that. So, and if it were to occur today, it's a good day for it because it's nice and cold and still. And other than the occasional burst of wind, all you have out here is my voice, me yapping into the camera. So a New Year's resolution, I need to find a better gimbal camera that's not one of these Fimi $300 Chinese-made pieces of shit that burns out after 3 months, because that's what I got after my first K1 died on me. And they're cheap. They don't survive the elements well. And when the thing died, it wasn't even like, it hadn't even been out in extreme heat, extreme humidity, or extreme cold. I think it was September. It had been out, but not too bad. So on a forestry perspective, deer shit for your science note-taking needs for the day. Today we have, that I'm going to cover, a bit of drama. To say this in the cliche sense, we are 6 days into the new year, and the Bigfoot community has served up fresh drama, which is kind of a historical sense of drama based on some things I know about the people involved. I will say one thing does involve the Tall Ones podcast, a source I do reference from time to time. And I'm going to say I don't have any dog in this particular fight because I've never met this. I like the cut of his jib. I agree with a lot of what he says, but I've never met the person on a personal level. So I throw out that disclaimer as well. The other person involved has been on my radar since 2006, I think. Interesting, the blind is still there. You're going to leave that up all winter, aren't you? Would have thought you would have taken it down, but oh well. And this person is kind of the bad guy in this, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. So some of this is cyber drama, and it goes back that far because once upon a time, this is a story that's going to kind of sound a little bit all over the place, but it actually does connect the dots if you pay attention. I'm curious what kind of rock that is from a geological perspective. Some kind of quartz? I don't know. Again, the EMF level stuff seems to go up when you're around little boulder fields like this. So, going back that far, during the earlier parts of NESRA's, the Northeastern Sasquatch Research Association's formative years, our would-be founder, our would-be guru, who refused to acknowledge the fact that there were 5 founding members, not just his ego, but things with this individual came to a head. I'm going to respect his privacy, number one, because I do think very strongly that he has mental health issues along the lines of schizophrenia. Somebody else had suggested that, and from the perspective of somebody whose better half has that running in her family, he has all the symptoms. Not to the point where he's dangerous, but to a point where he probably should be on psych meds of some kind if he isn't. Hopefully he's doing better, though. But at the time, he had fallen on NESRA's last collective nerve, and despite his being told, or his telling the tale otherwise, he had been given the option to either A, shape up, or ship out. And he chose to do the latter and ship out. But not before telling the universe that he had been thrown out of the group, he had been betrayed, blah, blah. Everybody's out to get me and all that loveliness. No, he had caused enough controversies for the group, in the group's name, mind you. And we had gotten sick of it and said, if we're going to survive as a group, he either needs to fall in line or be on his merry way. Interesting lichens. If any mushroom geek knows what that is, please put it in the comments and let me know. Thank you. And he ended up reemerging in the MABRC, the Mid-America Bigfoot Research something, run by a gentleman whose last name is Lee. who is relevant to the story. He shall come up a few times. Lee is his last name, not his first name. And the reason this group gets a mention is because they are currently run by a gentleman who is trying to play the role of hoaxbuster, even though their entire early history is replete with hoaxing. For those of you who remember the Bullet Maker hoax, this was a gentleman whose last name was Bilby out of Oklahoma, who had 80 acres, I believe it was, of property where he rented out deer stands, and they were doing an alleged habituation project. This went on for 5 bleeping years before all of a sudden this group entered into their Ed Smith phase and decided that his hoax was no longer profitable or exploitable or whatever, because Ed Smith is the one who was originally doing something called the Orig 6, some top secret freaking top flight group that no one had ever heard of because they're top flight, I guess. They of course mutated into the Team Contra, which brought us Daisy in a clamshell trap, and that all turned out to be a big fat fucking hoax, and we all know where that went if you are familiar with that time period. And despite the fact the world saw this Mr. Lee giving blow-by-blow, play-by-play that entire hoax and was neck deep in it, I know for a fact that the other person who is going to get mentioned as this story evolves actually went out to dinner and had a personal state of relations with Ed Smith, tying into a statement on his own lack of credibility, despite the fact he has a reputation for being quite the little know-it-all, and he does. And of course, to listen to it today, of course, this Mr. Lee decided that he had busted the hoax, despite the fact he was an active participant in it. And to this day, despite his reputation currently being ever so obtusely forgetting his past, Pepperidge Farms remembers your past. Like, motherfucker, you're a hoax. You know what? You're a hoaxer, you hoax, and that's, your credibility is non-existent, so whatever. However, he's not the main star in the story. He is just the building up to the point. The reason that the MABRC is relevant to the story is they had as a member the other person in the dispute with the one who runs the Tall Ones podcast, and that is a person whose last name is Harrington. Now, on the same lines and potentially in his defense, much like the guy who runs the Tall Ones, I have never met Mr. Harrington personally, but I do know people and have personal friends who have had interactions with him from this last year. That will be part of our story. And Mr. Harrington was at one point a member of this group. Among their other exploits, they have the Bullet Maker hoax, the Ed Smith hoax of Daisy fame, and members who had a notorious habit of casting tracks that went from, they started out like 2 feet long and started just becoming like ridiculously King Kong sized, and yet nobody called hoax on the guy. Last name being Whitehead. If you're listening to this and you know that, yes, we remember you doing that. Hopefully you've grown up from doing that, but a hoax is a hoax is a hoax. And that's what you're doing at the time, and you damn well know it. So, that being said, Mr. Harrington was part of this group until at some point, I'm not sure what role he had in their parting of ways. But before that, I also know, because this also plays into the story of the back and forth with his current kerfuffle, his own words, ironically, with the Tall Ones. There was a female who, I think she's from Ohio, if I remember correctly, and she had a bad falling out with his group. And according to her and another person who I have not been in touch with for several years, but someone who tells the story of Mr. Harrington basically being an avid cyber stalker of hers and some other people, and would be very quick to say, if this person comes up in your radar in the community, avoid this guy like the bloody plague, because he basically is one. And so these two females were basically stalked, and there were some hate blogs on Blogger that were made over some other people. The John Phillips lawsuit had an active participation by Mr. Harrington too. That is out there. If you go looking, it's out there as a matter of the public record. You may have to pay for a PACE record for it, but it's there. And let us just say, in his dealings with people in the current day and age, the trend continues. Should he happen to come across his video and start doing that in my direction, do understand one thing, Mr. Harrington, I will pursue legal recourse. Should you do that? I won't. That's one thing I will not put up with. So, yeah. Also, you see the stick that's right there, that lovely stick structure? Bigfoot did not do that. Just going to put that out there. Anyway, that's how that got there. Now it looks like that. Anyway. Same thing with that arch over there. The obsession of a person who I got into it with a couple weeks ago. In this case, you have an arch, and you also literally see the heavier log on top weighing it down, doing that right there. You have another one right next to it, too, doing basically the same thing, snaggled up in there, and that's what's doing that. Moving on. So Mr. Harrington, the one time he showed any sense of any kind of integrity, basically had parted ways with the MABRC, and on a different Facebook group, he had given a dissertation on all the hoaxing nonsense they had done. And for a brief moment, I actually had a grudging respect for the guy, because he served up the tea, to borrow a very annoying, overly used Gen Z saying, and had shown all the things. He calls out this Whitehead guy for his King Kong track collection. If your tracks are that big, you're talking about an ape that's easily 20 feet tall. Where the fuck are you going to hide that in here? Come on. I mean, there's a point where, like, you're taking the fantasy world and just making it so fucking goddamn contextually ridiculous. I mean, come on, guys. Really? We of the community demand a more plausible lie. You know? Anyway. And that is not the trend, sadly. Anyway, he served up a lot on that, and basically he comes right out and says what I had always suspected about the group. They're a bunch of hoaxing idiots, and they think that they are the best. To listen to them, they're the best of the best of the best of the best of the bestest, and they are not. They're hoaxers. They are hoaxers, plain and simple. I hate to say this, but the people that are doing real research with sincere motives are probably, at this point, solo acts and low profile like myself. And probably follow a similar model because they just don't like the drama of the community, although it is a fascinating side study of the subject in and of its own right. And kind of self-replicating. I think the guy that used to do Off the Richter, had he continued to do his show in that shtick, quite honestly, he would have just continued to have material ad nauseum, ad infinitum, because there ain't no shortage of it. The current kerfuffle is just more proof of this. So his one moment in the sun when he had some integrity, he served up the skinny on the MABRC, and they were every bit the bunch of hoaxing knuckleheads that we would have thought they were. And then he went off into the wilderness and came back on the radar when he came up with something called The 400, which is a subject of a documentary out there somewhere on Amazon Prime. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to review it. That's not what this is. This is a commentary on the current kerfuffle. So before we get to the current kerfuffle, we have his previous tendency to cyberstalk people. He may have done it to me. I know that Mr. Lee has cyberstalked me for years. He may still be doing it. And if you go to the group he runs on Facebook, Hoaxers, Bigfoot Hoaxers Exposed 2.0, he basically confesses to this and he's proud of it. Ignoring for a moment the fact that he has a lengthy criminal history. If you look him up on the docket search in Oklahoma, he has a nice little record for some interesting reading if you're that nosy at some point. And yes, Mr. Lee, I went there. Just to let you know, yeah, people know all about you, and yeah. Interestingly enough, Mr. Harrington had a problem keeping his hands off of cars that weren't his back in his youth, too. I would assume at this point he's outgrown the need or the tendency to do that, but he does have a checkered past of his own. But I guess we all make mistakes on some level. But he went into the 400, and in the course of doing this, he hooked up with another gentleman who I don't know from a hole in the wall, so for the most part, I'm going to keep his name out of this just because I don't know him. But a friend of mine, local to the area, got pulled into this too, and at some point around, I want to say early June of this year, ended up walking away. And yes, there's a hunting blind over there. If you're thinking that I'm hoaxing, no, it was there. It was there last week too. There's a guy, he forgot, as I said, he forgot to bring it in for the winter because it's going to be all snowy and covered with snow later today. Anyway, he got pulled into the 400 too, and at some point in early June, there was a falling out of some kind where, according to my friend, so I mean, I will admit, the disclaimer here, I only have half the story. He walked away claiming the other party, not Harrington, quote unquote, got greedy, and that turned him off, so he walked away from the project. I have no reason not to take his word for that. But he said of Mr. Harrington, he's a know-it-all, and he's probably one of the worst people in the community, and that does echo a lot of what I've heard about the guy. But as far as I know, that's where it ended, because my friend has made it clear on more than one occasion he's moving. He doesn't hold a grudge. He moves on, learns his lesson, and will shake off the dust and go on to the next thing. Whereas what Mr. Harrington said of him was something, and this is, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but he basically said he started seeing red flags, and that's his thing. He has red flags. And one of the more interesting quirks of the people that were and are from the MABRC is they keep dossiers on other researchers like they're some kind of bigfooting CIA or something. That has always fucking creeped me out. Pardon my French. They have one for me. They have one for any one of a number of other people. And even though Darren comes right out and says, I'm probably not a hoaxer, he accuses me of some very colorful things. And I will emphasize, this is a guy who has never met me in person, never talked to me in person. We've never even had a direct conversation beyond a brief disagreement online. And yet he has my life story as if he knows all of this. And he's slowly trying to get more information. That's his little confession. And I'm slowly developing more information on this person as if it's his mission and obligation and privilege to report on my personal life. Not that he's the only Bigfooter to ever try to stalk me or try to intimidate me at work or anything. And if you are the one who did that and you happen to see this video, you know who you are, and I've forgiven you for it, but you better damn well never do it again. If you had noted that there's a little bit of a borderline threatening tone to that statement, that's because there is. Law enforcement is standing by should you think that you know better. That's all I'll say to that. Anyway, he walked away, but he had red flags. And what he's saying now about the tall ones, he sees red flags in the podcasting host, but this is where we have a fresh look into some of the things I've already mentioned, and that is specifically the following. To hear it from the tall one's perspective, he was approached by Mr. Harrington to help expose a hoaxer. That suddenly Mr. Harrington, and this plays into the whole stalky, keeping dossiers on other people thing that these freak shows do. And I'm just going to say it again. There's a difference between being aware of somebody in the community and being amused by their antics. And actually having a freaking online database of people's personal information because you don't agree with their stance on a freaking subject that the mainstream doesn't even generally take seriously. as if you're some kind of a law enforcement agency. That's creepy. That is creepy. That is cyber stalking. And the people that do that, and I'm not going to even say, pardon my French with this, the people that do that are motherfucking scumbags. Plain and simple. If you do that, you're a scumbag and you're essentially a criminal. The two people I'm accusing in this video are people with criminal history, so I am not inaccurate in my claim. So I'm not using your full name. I'm not making it overly clear who you are. And if you get thoughts of freaking defamation, defamation begins with the words false statement. And any lawsuit attempt going on has this thing called a discovery phase. And during that discovery phase, all the dirt that would prove me right comes out in open court and becomes part of the public record, searchable under the PACE system, whether you like it or not. So when I get into dirt like this, my bases are covered. So according to the podcaster from the Tall Ones, name deliberately left out for the sake of respecting his privacy, Randy approached him, well, Mr. Harrington, approached him to help out a hoaxer, because that is basically the shtick of the podcast that the Tall Ones does. More often than not, he's poking fun at people that are clearly grifting and making outlandish, silly claims and things like this. He's mentioned a few. We've covered them here and there. And he's been attacked and doxxed, and people have tried to misuse the YouTube system to try to censor his message, which is a bitch move, by the way. And so he apparently was contacted while he was at his place of employment. And to be perfectly blunt, I would have done the same thing. I would not have initially gotten back to him because I am in the office. I'm at work. Leave me alone. Hobby time is for hobby time, not work time. And this is a perfectly plausible and justifiable defense for not getting immediately back to Captain Entitlement, aka Mr. Harrington, but apparently along the lines of the cyber stalkish circumstances I described previously, all of a sudden the podcaster is being bombarded by texts or PMs or whatever that this guy is demanding his attention, and gets all offended when he does not have that instant gratification of getting that. So at that point, being taken aback by the rush of attention, there it is, the telltale obligatory moose shit that's always out here. God bless Bullwinkle for providing. Mr. Harrington yet again reveals that even in the modern day, these traits are still there. And it's why anyone who is in the know and has been for any time, if you want to misuse the term red flag, will avoid this guy like the plague, because he is one. There are certain people out there, I'm just not going to sugarcoat my thoughts or be diplomatic, because they don't deserve it. This guy, despite trying to come across like a Midwestern, wholesome, straight-up guy, is a creep. He's a fucking creep. He is a creep on the same level that Mr. Lee is. These two people are creepy. Avoid them. Going into the many sins of Mr. Lee, honestly, would be a whole different episode. And you can, get out a game show wheel of sin against the Bigfoot world and just pick a category. I'll just say that. Getting back to Harrington, though, he was bombarding the podcaster, demanding his attention, demanding a response. And it was enough for this gentleman to understandably say, you know what, I really just don't want to deal with this guy. And so he went on silent running and decided not to respond and just go on with his day and go and do his own thing. Perfectly understandable given the circumstances. And now we are treated, this is like from this week, by the way, by the back and forth with these two. And although it sounds like I have some favoritism for the tall ones, again, never met the guy. I do know some of his past, and he initially fell in with the wrong people in the community and has demonstrated some character, in my opinion, by attempting to learn from his mistake and move on. So for that reason alone, he does have my basic respect. Coupled with saying, in my world, I give you courtesy, respect is earned. Not a freebie. And especially if I bring somebody out here that I have not met, understand if you're out with me the first time, I am vetting you to see if there's going to ever be a repeat of it again. And quite honestly, you should do the same with me. But, so, we're now into a petty tit and tat kind of phase of this where Harrington is saying that he again has red flags regarding the tall ones guy. And the tall ones guy not being one to take a completely unnecessary slap in the face lying down has challenged Harrington to say, okay, so what are the red flags? And this is where we kind of come to the conclusion of my point. In response, Harrington straight up says the only way he's going to get into it is if he has Harrington on his podcast. He can't be a man and just have a chat off the record. He has to have it on the record. He has to be the big chest-thumping freaking egomaniac that everybody basically knows that he is. And get free airtime to plug his 400 situation, which I'm starting to think, based on a couple of sources that I've heard, is a whole lot more about dollar signs. I don't know at this point that there's any kind of a GoFundMe or any kind of a grift going on. Mainly due to the fact I haven't looked. But it does smell hoaxy, and given the history of this gentleman, that is where my suspicions lie. Now, that being said, having looked at some of the so-called evidence with finger quotes from the project, it is the same old dark shapes of pareidolia in between the trees. Track casts that could be anything. From a former member of a group that was making King Kong footprints that were clearly fake. So, saying what I'm saying without directly saying it. If you are more diplomatic than I am, and Lord knows I am not the most subtle or diplomatic person in the world, still apply a grain of salt the size of a wheelbarrow with this individual. I'm not going to speak to his partner in crime because, again, in his defense, I don't know the guy from a hole in the wall. And I'm not going to do that. The only reason that Harrington's on my radar at all is because he popped up earlier in the year with a friend request, because that was surprising to me, basically because he and I don't see eye to eye. We never have. And I barely know the guy, so I kind of found that odd. Come to find out, and just for anyone else who doesn't know this, in the Bigfooting world, there are two Mike Humphreys. There are two people with the name Mike Humphrey. And for those that don't know, Mike is actually my middle name, and for reasons growing up and personal, I use my middle name online as opposed to my first name, which is none of your damn business. Unless you already know. Some people do, some people don't. But the point is, there is another Mike Humphrey who lives down south and has been mistaken for me and vice versa more than once. So when it does happen, I'm not shocked. I just kind of point out, there are, just so you know, if you weren't aware, there's two of us. One is down south, one lives in New England. I'm the one from New England. And it's just better to be transparent about that so you don't get into stupid misunderstandings where somebody's trying to say, well, he impersonated. It's like, no, we have the same name. It is what it is. And it's just better to make that distinction than not. But I guess what happened was Harrington had misidentified me as I'm describing now. Interesting little run of water that came down through here. You can see where the floodplain is. And thought I was the other one who, last I knew, was a member of the GCBRO, and I think he's involved with a Killing Bigfoot show. Different rant for another day, but I'm not going to attack that gentleman because, quite honestly, again, I don't know him from a hole in the wall, so it's not mine to throw shade where I don't know what I'm talking about. Harrington, though, unfortunately, I know enough of his past. That's the lesson for this one. I'm aware of the resulting drama from this, and it is better to apply a fast and loose judgmental grain of salt than not. And with that, I am going to wrap up this segment. And it's quiet as hell out here. There's no sign of any real life today. The pulsating sound ain't there. And I have resigned myself to the probability it was a one-time thing, which will vex me because that means I'll never know what the hell it was. It was that weird. We're going to call this one at this point. Sorry, this one was more dirt. But again, I did say that in the new year, part of my resolution is to apply more of a sciencey thing. I think I did some of that. It's amazing the different kinds of lichen out there. I'll end on that note. But I also did promise that I was going to call BS on the nonsense, and I have. And we're not even a week in, and we already have a fresh batch. So that's a thorough breakdown of what's going on there in my very much less than humble opinion. If you want more science and less drama, please indicate in the comments, and I will make the effort to balance the payload, so to speak. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe if you're so moved to, and we'll catch you the next time, and it'll probably look a whole lot whiter out here due to the snow that's coming today. They were projecting, and it is that still kind of weather in New England that's going to probably drop a decent amount. So they were projecting 3 to 6 down where I am. So up here, it could be a whole foot. I could be snowshoeing next week. Time will tell. Until then, we'll catch you next time, and bye.